This warrior died for your soul. His name is Jesus Christ. He was the Son of God who came to earth as a man to fulfill the Scriptures and prophesy of the Messiah. He was to be the sacrificial Lamb of God and to bore the sins of the world. He knew that he would suffer a horrendous death through crucifixion. Yet he was willing to lay down his life for those who would call upon the name of the Lord and be saved. Can you imagine someone knowing what would befall them before it happened and do nothing to stop it? The absolute worst death that someone could imagine. A prolonged agony and suffering, and yet still ask God to forgive them, for they know not what they do? This was found in Luke chapter 23, verse 34. Dr. C. Truman Davis conducted a detailed and thorough physical investigation of the excruciating and painful death Jesus Christ suffered on the cross. The first known practice of crucifixion was by the Persians. Alexander and his generals brought it back to the Mediterranean world, to Egypt and to Carthage. The Romans learned the practice from the Carthaginians. When Jesus was in the Garden of Gethsemane while his disciples slept, he prayed this in Luke chapter 22, verse 42. Father, if you are willing, take this cup from me, yet not my will, but yours be done. Jesus knew as a human being that he would suffer a horrendous death. The stress of knowing this caused hematidrosis, or bloody sweat. Tiny capillaries in the sweat glands break, mixing blood with sweat. Jesus was arrested by the chief priest and captains of the temple and the elders. They brought him to the high priest Caiaphas' house. The men that held Jesus mocked him and smote him. They blindfolded him, saying, "Prophesy, who is it that smote thee?" The next day they led him into Pilate, the procurator. But Pilate sent him to King Herod. Herod and his men mocked him and arrayed him with a gorgeous robe and sent him again to Pilate. Barabbas, called a notorious prisoner, was chosen by a crowd over Jesus to be released by Pontius Pilate in a customary pardon before the feast of Passover. Jesus was stripped of his clothing and his hands tied to a post above his head to be scourged before crucifixion. The scourging consisted of 40 lashes with a flagrum. But the Romans were merciless, so it probably was more than 40 lashes. The Roman soldier steps forward with the flagrum, which is a whip with heavy leather thongs. Each thong has 2 small balls of lead attached near the end. The whip is brought down with full force again and again across Jesus' shoulders, back, and legs. At first, the thongs cut through the skin only. They then begin to cut deeper into the subcutaneous tissues, first oozing of blood from the capillaries and veins of the skin, and finally spurting arterial bleeding from the vessels in the underlying muscles. The small balls of lead first produce large, deep bruises, which are broken open by subsequent blows. Finally, the skin of the back is hanging in long ribbons, and the entire area is in an unrecognizable mass of torn, bleeding tissue. Near death, the bleeding is finally stopped. The Roman soldiers see a joke in this provincial Jew claiming to be king. They throw a robe across his shoulders and place a stick in his hand for a scepter. They need a crown, so they take flexible branches covered with long thorns and make a crown. They push the crown into his scalp, causing excessive bleeding. After mocking him and striking him across the face, The soldiers take the stick from his hand and strike him again across the head, driving the thorns deeper into his scalp. The robe then is torn from his back, likened to a bandage that is stuck to a wound and ripped from the skin. Imagine the pain. The heavy patibulum, which is a piece of wood crossbar weighing approximately 110 pounds, is tied across his shoulders, and the procession down the Via Dolorosa to Golgotha, where a pole stipes is permanently driven into the ground. On the road, the rough wood gouges his already bleeding skin, and he can't stand. Simon of Cyrene carries the patibulum the rest of the 650-yard journey from Antonia to Golgotha. When they arrive, Jesus is thrown back onto the patibulum on the ground. The legionnaire feels for the depression at the front of the wrist. He drives a heavy, square, wrought iron nail through the wrist and deep into the wood. It is driven through the wrist, which is identified by anatomists in history as part of the hand. If it were driven into the palm, it would rip through the fingers and would not hold. The legionnaire repeats the action with the other wrist. The patibulum is lifted in place at the top of the stipes, which is that upward post previously mentioned. The titulus, a sign with an inscription reading Jesus of Nazareth, King of the Jews, is posted. The left foot is then pressed backward against the right foot, and with both feet extended, toes down, a nail is driven through the arch of each, leaving the knees moderately flexed. He is now crucified. As he slowly sags down with more weight on the nails in the wrist, excruciating pain shoots along the fingers and up the arms to explode in the brain. The nails are putting pressure on the median nerves. As he pushes himself upward to avoid this stretching torment, he places his full weight on the nail through his feet. Searing agony of the nail tearing through the nerves between the metatarsal bones of the feet is unbearable. The arms fatigue, and great waves of cramps sweep over the muscles, knotting them in deep, relentless, throbbing pain. With these cramps comes the inability to push himself upward. Hanging by his arms, the pectoral muscles are paralyzed, and the intercostal muscles are unable to act. Air can be drawn into the lungs, but cannot be exhaled. Jesus fights to raise himself in order to get even one short breath. Finally, carbon dioxide builds up in the lungs and in the bloodstream, and the cramps partially subside. In these times, he is able to push himself up to exhale. During this time is when he most likely uttered the 7 short sentences recorded. The first, looking down at the Roman soldiers throwing dice for his seamless garment, "Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do," found in chapter 23, verse 34 of the book of Luke. The second, to the penitent thief, "Today thou shalt be with me in paradise," in Luke chapter 23, verse 43. The third, looking down at the terrified, grief-stricken adolescent John, the beloved apostle, he said, "Behold thy mother." Then looking to his mother Mary, "Woman, behold thy son." The fourth cry is from the beginning of the 22nd Psalm, verse 1, and in Matthew chapter 27, verse 46, and Mark chapter 15, verse 34. My God, why hast thou forsaken me?" Jesus experienced hours of limitless pain, cycles of twisting, joint-rending cramps, intermittent partial asphyxiation, searing pain where tissue is torn from his lacerated back as he moves up and down against the rough timber. Then another agony begins, a terrible crushing pain in the chest as the pericardium slowly fills with serum and begins to compress the heart. One remembers the 22nd Psalm, the 14th verse. I am poured out like water, and all my bones are out of joint. My heart is like wax,